Hey crafters, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to make a slimline card featuring one of my favorite mini Lawn Fawn sets, Stud Puffins. Hope you enjoy. So the card that I'm making today has a finished size of 3.5 by 8 1/4. So I'm going to start with a bit of white, which is 3 by 7 3/4. And I'm just going to lightly blend on some tumbled glass distress ink. You don't need to be perfect with this, just a nice light coating. Then I'm going to use some Salty Ocean distress ink, and I'm going to blend it around the outside to create a frame. Then I'll go back with the tumbled glass and blend the two colors together. Now, one of the great things about slimline cards is that you can make them to any size that you like. Just keep in mind that you'll need to have an envelope big enough for your card to go into. So now I'm going to take my Memento Tuxedo Black and I'm going to stamp some of those puffins. So I'm going to do a few facing the left and then a few facing the right until I have a nice colony of them. And then I'm going to use the little fish that's included in the stamp set. And I'm going to stamp him along the bottom of my card so that I have some fish in the water. I will stamp some of them facing the left here and then just rotate my acrylic block so that I have some facing the right. And while I've got the fish handy, I'll just stamp a few of them onto my sheet of puffins as well. All right, now I'm going to set this aside and color in my fish. So I just used 2 colors of Copic for this, just a basic yellow and a basic orange. And I didn't worry too much about blending the fish on my background because I will be covering them with a bit of water later on, and that will mute their colors a little bit. So now I'm going to die cut my icebergs, and I'm going to use the die from the critters in the Arctic. I'm not going to stamp it, I'm just going to cut out 3 of those icebergs there. And then once I've cut them out, I will cut out all my puffins and all my fish, and then I can start to color them in. Now, if you don't have this die set for the icebergs, you could always just cut out 3 shapes that roughly look like icebergs. So now I'm going to start coloring in my images, and I'll start with the fish, and I'm going to use the same 2 colors, the yellow and the orange. Starting with the yellow, I'm going to color the whole fish in, and then I'll just do one end of it orange, and then I'll go back again with the yellow and blend those together. Now the puffins are really easy to color, and I'm just going to use the black for the main part of the puffin's body. And then I'll do some little detailing with orange. And I noticed that puffins tend to have a little bit of orange around their eyes. So I just added the same orange to their feet and the end of their beak and a little bit around their eyes. And then I went in with my white jelly pen to add some little highlight details. Now you could shade this with grays if you prefer, but I wanted my puffins to be really dark and black and stand out against that light blue background. So I'm going to repeat this on all my colony of puffins and all my little fish, and then I'll start on my icebergs. So I'm going to use this glacier paste on my icebergs, and I'm just using a little spatula to spread it on. And I'm kind of patting with my spatula so it's a little bit bumpy. And I'm just going to repeat this on all 3 icebergs, and then I'm going to set them aside on a clean piece of paper. Now, if you're lucky enough to have this glass mat, it's probably easier to use the white area of the mat, which is really meant for messier crafts. But I wanted you to be able to see these icebergs on camera, which is why I did it on the black glass area of the mat. Now, while this is still wet, I'm going to pick up each iceberg with my tweezers and use my heat gun to heat from underneath and above the iceberg so that the heat from the heat tool creates this beautiful bubbled pattern. And as the embossing gun hits the Nuvo paste, it starts to bubble and you get this beautiful pattern. Now, if you left this to dry naturally, you would just have the pattern that we created with the spatula. So the one on the right is the before and the one on the left is the after. So you can see you get that rich, bubbly texture. And after you've used your heat gun, just set this aside to dry for a couple hours so that it's completely dry and you can add it to your card. So now I'm going to use my clear glitter pen and I'm going to apply some water to my card. And since this is a wet glitter pen, I can use this to adhere some distress embossing glaze to my card. So I'm going to start with some speckled egg and put that along the bottom. And then I'll just tap it gently on this piece of paper and funnel it back into the container. And before I heat set it, I'm just going to add a little bit of broken china embossing glaze. And this will just add some little darker blue hints. And I'm just going to pick up the embossing glaze with my fingers and pinch it and drop it in various places on the water. And that just gives it more of a variegated look. You could, of course, add more or less depending on the effect that you want on your card. And now I'm going to heat this from underneath so that it's melted and the embossing glaze doesn't fly around my work surface. It stays contained. And what you're left with is a beautiful, sparkly river, perfect for your puffins and the floating icebergs. This is quite sparkly in real life and it's sometimes hard to capture on camera. So now we're going to adhere the icebergs to the front of the card, and for this I just use foam squares. Make sure the icebergs are completely dry before you do this because you don't want to squash any of those bubbles. Now once I'm happy with the placement of these, I will start to add my puffins. Now to add some more interest to my card, I'm going to have a few of my puffins holding a fish in their beak. So the way I did this is I just took my scissors and I cut the beak in the puffin right down the center following that line. And then I squeezed the fish in between and using a bit of double-sided tape or washi tape, just tape that in place. And that way, some of the puffins are holding fish already in their beaks. So then I just placed my puffins on my icebergs until I was happy with them and adhered the puffins with some double-sided foam squares. Now to make it a bit more interesting, try tilting your puffins so that it looks like there's some movement on the card. So once I've secured all the puffins in place, I can start adding my finished touches. So this black card is 3 1/4 inches by 8 inches. So just a 1/4 inch bigger than the main image panel. And then the actual card base that I'm using is 3 1/2 by 8 1/4. And I just used an A4 sheet of paper and trimmed and scored this. But as I mentioned earlier, your Slimline card can have any dimensions. So I used double-sided tape to adhere the main panel on the black and then glue just to adhere it on the front of my card so that I could wiggle it around until it was straight. Now I'm just going to add my sentiment on the inside of the card from the same stamp set. This is the Sending Love, And I'm going to use one of my leftover puffins holding a fish and adhere him in the card as well for a little fun touch. Now I tried to do as much of this card as I could without using extra stamp sets, besides from the icebergs. But I wanted a special sentiment on the outside of the card. I thought it was missing something. So I found this Seize the Day sentiment in the On the Beach Lawn Fawn stamp set. And I'm just going to adhere that and then add one of the leftover fish to the card. And then I can use that little leftover puffin and those fish on the envelope. I just love those puffins. I hope you enjoyed this Slimline card with these beautiful stud puffins and floating icebergs. Be sure to subscribe so you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!